Hello, I'm Steven. Welcome to today's episode of Life as We Know It. March 15th, midway through March already. What is it, the first day of spring? Technically March 21st, I guess. And then you've got St. Patrick's Day on the way on Friday. So should be a good weekend. Background on me real quick. Been doing radio since I discovered it by accident my junior year of college. And kind of started just doing this because after doing morning shows and talking with some talented people and hanging out on the radio solo, sometimes you just have things to say that you want to talk about that doesn't fit in between when you're playing records like Tate McRae and Keith Urban and Shinedown and whatnot. But the whole podcasting world gives you the freedom and the opportunity to kind of say what's on your mind and share your thoughts with other people, whether they love you, hate you, or tolerate you. So that's what we do. You can like and follow me on all the socials. I am at Stephen Lewis on the air, or click the links in this video that you're watching. So, video games. But before we get to that, some good stuff out there that is happening. If you have not jumped on Season 3 of The Mandalorian, it is pretty good thus far. Solid effort. If you're not into science fiction, I'm loving the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air remake on Peacock. It's good stuff as well. So there's some good things out there to watch right now. And Last of Us is setting streaming records. What's not setting streaming records? Willow. And you know, it's kind of funny. I said this about a month or so ago. I finally watched Willow, and it was just such a letdown. So I'm not surprised that it was canceled after one season. It just felt like it had the wrong vibe. I didn't care about any of the characters, and it seems like whatever magic the 1988 version had just did not translate into this series at all. I also got a chance to see Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and I will do that tomorrow because I don't have time to do it today. And today we're talking about video game adaptations that found their way into movies and TV shows. Last of Us is killing it right now. In fact, the season finale of Last of Us did better streaming numbers than House of the Dragon did, the Game of Thrones spinoff. So either way, HBO has multiple hits on their hand, and I was impressed by Last of Us for a lot of different reasons. I saw a video somebody broke down shot by shot the show and the game, and it's incredible how close they came to everything. They did some minor changes. I played the game, which was really a fun game to play and a cool game to play. And the series is very faithful to the game. The creators came out and promised there will be more infected next time around. And that's the one thing that this show did lack. It had, when you did see them, they were spot on to what they were in the game, and it was pretty cool. But there just wasn't a lot of them. And they did change some scenes around a little bit. But I think everything they did on this show really worked a lot. Good casting with Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal. So, and then you had the video game stars got to play some. Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker showed up in essentially extended cameo roles. That was a lot of fun. So Last of Us, very well done. But the whole video game to movies didn't start till the 90s. I'm a proprietor that everything is better in the 90s, and that's when video games really started booming. Yes, there was the classic Atari and ColecoVision or whatnot from the 80s, but things really exploded in the 90s with Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega, and all that kind of good stuff. So video games got ridiculously popular, and Hollywood, always trying to make a buck, why not make video games into movies? But the problem with this has become, even though some of these actually made a pretty good chunk of money, they were so far removed from what the game was that the faithful of the video game just hated it. So even though it made money, and in some cases wasn't necessarily a complete failure, it wasn't necessarily a success either. You've probably seen the trailers for the new animated Mario Brothers with Chris Pratt, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it looks pretty good. But back in 1993, there was another Super Mario Brothers. In fact, it was one of the first movies to ever be made from a video game. Made a grand total of $38 million, almost $39 million, and was widely panned. Bob Hoskins was Mario. I believe John Leguizamo was Luigi, and it was just a victim of poor-looking sets. It looked cheaply made. It probably was cheaply made. It didn't do well. Neither did Double Dragon, which was an 80s video game where you were two brothers like kung fu fighting through the game. That came out in 94 with Scott Wolf from Party of Five and the Iron Chef himself, Mark Dacascos. They were the two stars. 4 million, less than, not even 42 million, $4,200,000. It was just not a good time at all. Has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 12%, but it's not the worst, mind you. That brings us to another fighting game, which I still love to this day. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about Street Fighter as a gamer. You're a Mortal Kombat guy, you're a Street Fighter guy. I was a Street Fighter guy. 1994, Christmas time, Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile. This is probably one of the worst cast movies ever. It is the last movie of Raul Julia and his great career. He played Bison in this. It does have a very young Ming-Na Wen from Mandalorian and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and about 100 other things. She was Chun-Li at the time. Made almost $100 million, has 11% score on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's just an awful adaptation of the game. The Ryu and Ken characters are god-awful. And it was outdone by Mortal Kombat, which, of all the video game movies that have come out, the first Mortal Kombat from 95 that made $125 million and has a 45% score on Rotten Tomatoes was, up until now, probably my favorite video game movie. I wasn't a Mortal Kombat fan, but I dug this movie. I had a lot of fun with it. It was not as bad as some of the others. Of course, now the Mortal Kombat sequel that rolled out in 97 has one of the lowest rankings on Rotten Tomatoes at 4% and was just god-awful. But despite being god-awful, still made almost $52 million, which, you know. Wing Commander, which was a video game that I'd never heard of, came out in 99 to almost $12 million with Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard. And then there was a little bit of a gap where nobody really made video games anymore outside of Lara Croft Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie that dropped in June of 2001, and it made almost $275 million, 20% score on Rotten Tomatoes, considered successful enough at the time to garner a sequel that would come a few years later, but not after Resident Evil dropped in 2002. Now, the thing about Resident Evil, I did play the Resident Evil games, and these movies came out, and they were loosely attached to the game, but all the characters in the game didn't show up until one of the 5 or 6 sequels popped out. But it made almost $103 million, despite having only a 35% score on Rotten Tomatoes. It garnered despite only scoring 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, it made enough to merit like 10 sequels after the fact, and wasn't horrible. Like, I enjoyed Resident Evil quite a bit. Cradle of Life, the Tomb Raider sequel, came out in 2003, made less than the first one, about $157 million. House of the Dead, 2003, only made $13 million. Another Resident Evil made $130 million. Alone in the Dark, almost $11 million. The Rock even tried the video game franchise thing back in 2005 when he was kind of starting to break into Hollywood with an awful rendition of Doom that didn't even make $56 million, which is awful by rock standards. Blood Rain, which was a video game that I'd never heard of, came out in 2006, made about $4 million. Silent Hill came out in 2006, dropped almost $98 million. Dead or Alive, the chick fighting video game, in September 2006, almost $8 million. Another Resident Evil, $150 million. Postal, which was a game I never heard of, $146,000. Hitman, I did like. In fact, I went as Hitman for Halloween one year. Lauren and I did a couple's costume. 2007 made $101 million. I dug Hitman a lot. Timothy Olyphant was the Hitman, who was Agent 47, and it was pretty good. Max Payne had Mark Wahlberg in it. $85 million. Chun-Li, The Legend of Chun-Li, Street Fighter, which might be the worst. I like Kristen Kruk from Smallville. 5% on Rotten Tomatoes and almost $13 million, and has Chris Klein, who is just god-awful in this movie, and this was just an awful, awful, awful rendition of Street Fighter. In fact, it might even be less of a Street Fighter rendition than the Jean-Claude Van Damme original from back in 94. I also like this movie too that a lot of people bagged on. Disney got into the video game movies with Jake Gyllenhaal in Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, May of 2010, made almost $340 million, so it wasn't bad, but when you start getting into all the special effects that go into it, these movies just don't kind of make the lines meet in the right way. A couple of more Resident Evil sequels that all did well. Like the Resident Evil Afterlife made almost over $300 million. Retribution made $240 million. Need for Speed, which was high off of the video game racing craze, made $200 and some odd million. The sequel to Hitman only made $82 million. Warcraft, which a lot of people play Warcraft, I never have, made almost $500 million or $450 million and is considered by most to be a failure. The cost of that, because it was mostly CGI, probably played into it a lot, but there's a lot of money that is being made from these things, but it's just not enough. And despite them making money, like everybody goes to see it once, people genuinely just hate these movies. And that brings us to the video game movie that may have pissed me off more than any other video game movie ever created by man. I am a gigantic Assassin's Creed fan. I have played every Assassin's Creed game since the first one that came out all the way back on, I believe it was either PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3, probably PlayStation 3. And then the Assassin's Creed movie came out with Michael Fassbender, who I like Michael Fassbender in a lot of things. In 2016, he decided to play in the Assassin's Creed world, and this game had little to nothing to do with the overall game of Assassin's Creed, made about $241 million, and was just god-awful. And I'm still trying to figure out what the hell they were thinking when they made this thing, but I'll come back to Assassin's Creed a little bit later. The final Resident Evil made another $300 million. Tomb Raider was redone with Alicia Vikander. I can't say her last name. I'm sorry. Made about $275 million. Rock remade a video game from the 80s called The Rampage, which made about $428 million. That wasn't bad, but I never played the game, so I can't tell you how faithful it was. Detective Pikachu, which Pokemon made $430 million. Congratulations, Ryan Reynolds. It did all right, and it's getting a sequel. Sonic the Hedgehog, which I got to admit, when I first looked at this, I'm like, this is god-awful, but it got 63% score on Rotten Tomatoes, another sequel, and made about $321 million. So not bad at the end of the day. And then there was Uncharted, which came out a couple of years ago with Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, that did about $400 and some odd million, which, again, not quite a faithful adaptation to the game, but there were some parts of the game that were fully on display there that I liked quite a bit. I didn't bag on Uncharted quite as much as everybody else. But I think the overall problem that I'm getting to is why I think a lot of these don't work is kind of similar to comic book movies. You're going to get the people who know the game anyway. So you have to be somewhat faithful to that source material, or you're going to lose that audience. And the key is be faithful to the source material, but at the same time, you've got to be able to branch out and get more than just the video game audience to come check out what you've got going on. And what happens is when you veer too far away from the game material, you end up making a bad movie. And then you pissed off the video game audience, and then you don't get anybody else that really wants to check it out either, and then word of mouth spreads, and sometimes you might make $300 million, but you spent $250 million to make the movie, and it's not a huge profit margin. But I think what they did right with Last of Us is they kept it kind of small as far as the scope of the sets and whatnot. The cast is small, and it's very faithful to what's going on. It keeps your attention the entire time, and I think that's how you do things. Why people feel this need to go so far away from the things that worked about something that you're adapting that people love is beyond me. I will never truly understand it. I understand when you're adapting a book into a movie that you can't necessarily take 2,000 pages and turn it into 2 hours. You're going to lose some stuff. Totally get that. But with a video game, when you change too much of the story, or, there are some things that I've always said are just better, that play better in animation than you can make look realistically good in real cinema, despite all the CGI and everything out there. So bottom line to all this is, if you have not seen Last of Us yet, it is so good. Check it out. It is worth it. It's 9 or 10 episodes, and every one of them is good. There's heart in there. There's a lot of father-daughter stuff that might cause some emotion with you there. There's, a lot of, mental issues that could arise that is pretty cool, and it's good. I heard Netflix is doing a Assassin's Creed series, and I truly hope that's the case, because I think Assassin's Creed would play very well if you stick close to what the game is, which is going back in time and reliving history through your ancestors, you know, to find things and powerful artifacts and whatnot. There's a lot of good material in Assassin's Creed that could play well if it's done the right way and not just, you know, cut to part to make a buck or make a quick buck when you're in theaters and whatnot. Anyway, that's what I got today. So video games that just kind of, not all of them translate. While you might be fun to go to town with a controller, they're not necessarily fun to sit there for 2 hours with popcorn watching and not want to turn them off. And then once in a while you get something that surprises you. But anyway, enjoy the rest of your evening. Tomorrow we'll talk a little Shazam, Fury of the Gods. Until then, spend some time with people you like, you love, or you tolerate, and get those brackets in if you're participating in March Madness. I believe you've got until noon tomorrow to have those bad boys submitted and try to win a little college basketball money. Enjoy yourself. Take advantage of your time because it is limited, so get out of here.